Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, Tatyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Tatyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. So taking our time and stabilizing this open-hearted, open-minded presence right here with the activity of the body and the mind, everything moving. Let it be a real release, a relief not to have to figure things out or define what's happening. But instead, in a more simple way, sensing there is this activity of the body being known. There is this activity of the mind and heart being known. And let that be enough. And some of that activity of the body, heart and mind might appear as being neurotic or not helpful, tight. And other of the activity here in the body and mind might be felt, be seen as more neutral or skillful, not a problem. But in either case, this activity of the body and the mind, skillful or not, it's just what it is. It's this activity of the body, this activity of the heart and mind being known. And the interesting question is, can all of this movement be okay? And even if in some habitual way the mind, the heart is resisting or wanting to control or wanting to fix, can that be okay? So even if there's some friction, some resistance, some tightness here, so we're valuing this stable, balanced, fearless, present moment awareness here, right in the middle of all this movement. Things are being known. One moment after another, the experience is being known. The experience of the body and the mind is being known. And as we aspire to relax and to trust this is being known, notice how over and over again there appears to be somebody doing something, or for short, there appears to be a doer. And with each of these moments of a doer appearing, there's some stress. It's stressful being a doer, doing something. Sometimes the doer is just the one being the knower, being the meditator. Sometimes the doer is fixing the posture or figuring out a problem, planning something, wondering what that sound is all about. So with whatever stability of present moment awareness there might be, just getting interested and noticing that sense of a doer doing, and noticing the inevitable tightness, even if it's subtle, that's there whenever there's that appearance of a doer doing something. So if there appears now to be a meditator, then it's not about stopping that, it's about recognizing that doer, the meditator, as something being known. It's not about judgment, it's just about a willingness to be close and to see things clearly. Seeing the meditator, the one who's meditating, as an experience that's being felt and known. So again, we're not trying to get rid of the doer, the knower, the meditator, whatever. Instead, we're just recognizing that appearance as something being known. course, in moments it might get convoluted, complex. There's some doer doing something, and then somebody not wanting there to be a doer doing something. But no matter how complex it becomes, it appears to be, in this moment it's something being felt, being known. It can be that simple. Knowing without a knower. Doing is being known, doing is happening without a doer. Everything happening on its own due to so many causes and conditions, a natural unfolding of the body and the mind. So just noticing when there appears to be a doer doing something or a knower meditating. Then notice how that perception naturally can shift from there being a knower to there's knowing. Something is being known. There's a doer and then it's doing is being known. So we're learning that the dropping of that sense of selfing, self-centeredness, that can happen quite naturally simply by trusting mindful awareness. Something is being known. This is being known. Keeping things as simple as they are, or letting things be as simple as they are. So we're getting familiar how the process of perceiving can, in a sense, flip from seeing the moment's activity in terms of self, a self-meditator, a self-meditating, self-knowing, a self-doing. And then it's possible, allowing the mind to become more simple or pure. Wisdom understands it's something being known. Knowing is happening, but no knower. Doing, activity is happening, but nobody doing. Notice the tension and the weight that comes with the selfing perspective. And notice the flavor of release and ease and lightness that arises from seeing, experiencing this moment as the activity of nature being known. experience being known. So again, we're not trying to control things, but when we notice that the mind is perceiving in terms of a self-doing or a meditating, then we notice the tightness that comes along. And when we notice simply something being known, knowing is happening, doing is happening, and that's it. It has a light, free flavor to it. again, the heart of this particular reflection we're doing from this place of some stability of awareness, being curious whenever the sense of there being a doer, doing something like meditating. So we're resolving just to notice that as something being known. And again, just to be intimate, to see or feel that experience of a doer as the present moment phenomena being known, being felt. Is this nature or self, this doer, this doing? Simply willing to put down any load whatsoever, just putting it down. Nowhere to go, no one to be or become, nothing to do. So just the body. Most of you know that Common Ground, since its inception in 1993, we've done all the programs, including our residential retreats, as a practice of dana, this beautiful generosity that protects all of us. And the encouragement is just to find more and more places in our lives where we operate this way in our intimate relationships, at our job sites, and all the communities we're part of. It's sort of like what I was suggesting with the guided meditation, to realize that how we're perceiving the moment, it's in play. It's not fixed. We think, this is the reality, but it's the reality that arises when I'm perceiving this way. And when I'm perceiving the moment in another way, the reality is different. You go to work with this perception that it's me against the folks with suits on, then your reality will be a certain way. And if you go to work with a different perception, then your reality will be a different reality. So, at Common Ground, we invite you to bring this perception, like to see Common Ground, to see yourself at Common Ground, to see the community, to see the teachers, to see the whole thing as this movement, this activity of generosity, and to really receive what comes, whatever of value comes your way, to really practice perceiving it as a free gift. And whatever response that arises in your heart to volunteer, to contribute money, or to wish well for the community, for the leaders, that's also perceived as a free gift. So we're really working on this perception and then noticing like how that works for you, what that sets in motion for you, and how that might work in other places in your life too. Right? That same, cultivating that same way of perceiving life, these different places in our life, as that circle, that movement of giving and receiving, as a kind of joy, a healing joy, an enlivening joy in our lives. You can see the same thing when you go home and you hang out with your cat, about receiving whatever you seem to receive from that beast as a free gift, as a beautiful gift. And whatever you give, any sort of taking care of, that flows out of you as a freely given gift. And see how that might work for you in terms of your relationship with the cat or the dog or whomever, whatever. So nearing the end of the course, we have one more week left, but just, the ask at Common Ground isn't for a contribution. The ask is for each of us in each of our ways to have a real relationship with the community, with the center, not to do it on autopilot, but to have a real relationship and to be curious about how to have a relationship that's really enlivening and fulfilling and leaves a good taste. Not something that makes us feel tight or makes us feel guilty or makes us feel anything that's heavy. That's our task, So what was that? How would that look for each of us, to have, when the idea of common ground comes to our mind, we're not like, ooh. It's like, oh, it feels clean, or feels light, or feels beautiful. How I'm relating, how I'm in relationship with this place, these teachings, this community, these leaders. And if you have questions about that, feel free to ask me afterward. Gail Iverson, a longtime teacher here, is also our bookkeeper. She works on Tuesday mornings and Thursday mornings now. And Gabe Keller Flores can also answer your questions. He works on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Shelley and I are around, so you can connect with us, of course, or read what's on the website and get the questions answered that you might have. Feel free to come up afterward tonight, too, if you have questions. So we're digging in, and the last few weeks, if you haven't been here or haven't listened to the talks, we were using the map of the 5 aggregates. It's just one way the Buddha, a very powerful and common way that the Buddha talked about this reality, right? This reality is the activity of body and mind. So the 5 aggregates, one of them is this activity of the body through the 5 senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, and the activity of the mind, perceiving, feeling tone, sensing the feeling tone, knowing the feeling tone, all the intentions, all the stuff, mental stuff, that arises because of contact, any contact with an idea, contact with a sight, a sound, right? It's like stringed instruments, If you have a really taut string, then if something happens, that string is going to sympathetically vibrate with whatever just happened, had impact, right? And like all the past exists in our sensitive heart as taut strings. So when I see something, when I hear something, when I think something, those strings start to sympathetically vibrate. And that's the mental formations, like what comes to the surface with every touch, with every sight, with every sound, with every thought, is all the stuff that sympathetically vibrates with that sound, that sight, that touch, that thought, right? Can't help it. It's not personal. Nobody decides to do or to not do that. It's nature, just like all these elements of the five aggregates: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, perceiving, having a feeling tone based on the particular contact, the experience. All the stuff that arises in conjunction with that contact, and that it's being known, the consciousness piece. All of that is the activity of nature, we say, not self. That's the perception we're cultivating. Can we train our heart to move through life, to function as a human being, to fall in love and fall out of love, and raise a cat or raise kids and earn a living and find our way home at the end of the program? Can we do that as an activity of nature, perceiving that as this dance of nature? And what actually is more functional? Perceiving it in terms of self, a self who's doing, a self who's liking or not liking, a self who's wanting or not wanting. What's a more functional way to perceive the activity of now, self-view, or as nature, not self-view? And to really think about it, as you're setting up your practice, just wanting to, relate, wanting to show up, wanting to be in life in a way that's functional and useful and healing and liberating, right? So it's not about we're trying to do it right. It's much more pragmatic than that. It's not about doing it right. It's about living skillfully in a way, like I was saying, in terms of dana, generosity, and how you relate to common ground, like living in a way that leaves a good taste, leaves a light, easeful, kindly impression, quality in the heart. That's what we're interested in. That's what I'm interested in. Here's the Buddha. In what respect is it said that the world is empty? Right? Because that word, that, things are empty, right? Can be a little strange. Empty of what? So he asks the question, in what respect is it said that the world is empty? And he answers this question, insofar as it is empty of a self or anything pertaining to a self. Thus it is said that the world is empty. And what is empty of a self or anything pertaining to a self? Right? So this moment is empty of self. So what is this moment? And so then normally he would either use the five aggregates, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, empty of self. Because it's just touch being known, hearing being known, seeing being known, smell and taste being known. Not more than that, just that being known. So it's empty of self. Perceiving is, no perceiver can be found, The feeling tone being known, but nobody having that feeling tone. That we don't find. We don't find the one who's having the yucky feeling tone. But we find the yucky feeling tone, but we don't find the one who's having the yucky feeling tone. We notice intention, but we don't find the one, the me, who is intending. We see the intending, the wanting, the motivation, the impulse, but we don't see the one. Same thing, we see consciousness, we see knowing, but we don't see the knower. And then here, in this particular sutta or discourse, he's not using the five aggregates, he's using the six sense gates. And what is empty of a self or anything pertaining to a self? The eye, the organ of the eye, the objects that the eye is seeing, and the consciousness that illuminates that contact of sensitive organ, object, being known. All three of those aspects of what we call seeing don't refer back to a self. It's a natural process. Same with smelling, right? We have a sensitive organ that, I don't know if it's in here or in the mouth, wherever we smell, right? We have a sensitive organ. There are smells that can be smelt, and there's consciousness that illuminates. And none of those three things coming together that we call smelling refers back to anything other than that being known. So with eyes and seeing and nose and smelling and touch or skin and touching and what am I missing? Ears and hearing. So the five physical senses and the intellect, the thinking mind, right? So we have a mind that can think and thoughts that it thinks and a consciousness that illuminates it. The Buddha divides, the contact into the sensitivity, like the organ that's sensitive, and the object that's being known, and that it's being known together make contact, the sense experience. And, whatever angle you look at a particular moment of sense experience, none of it refers back to a thing, to a permanent self. So we can just train ourselves to keep it really simple and straightforward, knowing these six sense gates, the mind, the mental activity, and the five physical senses are being known. Thus it is said that the world is empty. So in the email today that I sent out, hopefully you got it, it's a chapter from, I think I mentioned last week that I'd be forwarding it from this book, and this could be a great manual for deeper study. Some of you, I know, already have it. It's Guy Armstrong's book, Emptiness, A Practical Guide for Meditators. And it's just the collection of the early Buddhist teachings on the Buddha's teachings on how this experience, being known, is empty of self. It appears that I'm here, right? But there are all kinds of appearances that have appeared to us that were just that. They were an appearance. And upon a more stable, honest, clear opening, connection with the moment, we realize that appearance was just that. It was just that appearance. It was that perception. So perceptions, can be based on the kind of programming we receive through culture, or perception, the perceptual process can be developed so that it's the way the mind is perceiving is arising from that balanced, clear, present moment awareness, things as they are. So we're cultivating Buddha, wakefulness, that can be awake, clearly awake to the way it is, Dhamma, Buddha knowing Dhamma. And some of you know, like we chanted at the beginning of the class, that's what, people who follow the Buddhist teachings, we revere this refuge of Buddha knowing Dhamma. We don't revere somebody who lived, you might, if you're kind of a devotional type, revere somebody who lived 2,600 years ago. But what is more useful to revere is what happened to that person who lived 2,600 years ago, but that same thing happening now. Cultivating a heart, an awakened heart, an awakenedness that is able to awaken to the way it is and align so that perception or view, understanding, wisdom is really arising then out of the integrity of Buddha knowing Dhamma. Wakefulness, clarity, balance, being aware, knowing the way it is, and seeing that it's just that being known. This is a poem by Jane Hirschfeld. There was a issue of Insight, what was it called, Inquiring Mind. Which used to be the journal for our early Buddhism Insight meditation community here in the West, and it happened for a couple of decades, but they've closed down maybe 5 years ago. But I think they have most of their issues online. This is from the fall 2001 if you want to track it down. And the articles in that Inquiring Mind were all about Anatta, the not-self characteristic. And they published a poem by Jane Hirschfeld, this wonderful poet, and she's also a practicing Buddhist. Only when I'm quiet and do not speak. Only when I'm quiet for a long time and do not speak do the objects of my life draw near. Shy, the scissors and the spoons and the blue mug, hesitant, even the towels, for all their intimate knowledge and scent of fresh bleach. How steady their regard as they ponder, dreaming and waking. The entrancement of my daily wanderings and tasks, drunk on the honey of feelings, the honey of purpose, they seem to be thinking a quiet judgment that glistens between the glass doorknobs. Yet theirs is not the false reserve of a scarcely concealed ill will. Right? They're not judging me. Nor that other arrive shying of pelted rocks. No, not that. For I hear the sigh of happiness each object gives off. If I glimpse for even an instant the actual instant, as if they believed it possible, I might join their circle of simple, passionate thusness, their hidden rituals of luck and solitude, the joyous gap in them where appears in us the pronoun I. I don't know if that was easily conveyed, but I really love that sense, like an ordinary object. And, we notice that sometimes in empty rooms, where we're sitting, for example, meditating, but maybe with our eyes open, maybe not using a directed meditation where we're using a meditation object, but we're just there in the moment. And it's like something calls to us in seeing the floor and seeing the window. There's something simple, like that word Jane uses in this poem, thusness. It's a Buddhist word. Like you might have heard in a lot of the suttas when the Buddha is speaking, if he's referring to himself, he'll refer to himself as the Tathagata. Have you heard that? The one thus gone. It's that word tata is thusness, suchness. You hear that in the Zen tradition, but it's from early, it's there in early Buddhism. Things as they are. Not more, not, we always, when we see something, it's hard for me to even see something ordinary like the black cushions without it having the richness of self, like, oh, that reminds me, of whatever it reminds me of, or I like that, or I don't like that, or that's a dirty one, why aren't they cleaning better? Right? It gets complex with self and all the baggage I place. But when the mind is more in the moment, more in that simplicity of the present moment, and their eyes are open or the ears are alive in the hearing, everything has that thusness quality that the poem is pointing to. That it's not more than what it is. And she sort of plays off like, what is she? I love these two phrases about the honey, drunk on the honey of feelings, right? She's referring to like us as opposed to these simple objects. We move through life drunk on the honey of feelings, the honey of purpose, right? Self-importance. This is from Ajahn Chah in his book, Being Dharma, the Essence of the Buddhist Teachings. These are some excerpts from that book. We believe happiness to be ourselves. We see ourselves as happy. We believe suffering to be ourselves, and we see ourselves as unhappy. We can't pull the mind out of this view, which means we are not seeing nature. In another book or another talk that Ajahn Chah gives, he uses this image. I find it a really powerful image, like in terms of our practice. We're a log floating down the river, and it's kind of nice, like not a lot of doing when we're a log floating down a river. But on one side, one bank is happiness, and on the other bank, on the other side, it's unhappiness. So as a practitioner, right, when we get caught, when we get close to one side, the idea is not to be confused by the happiness or the unhappiness, not to get entangled with the happiness or the unhappiness, not to have preference for the happiness or the unhappiness, not to have a personal preference. Of course, the way our heart is conditioned, when we're bumping up against that side, the happiness side, it's going to feel and look like happiness. And we're bumping up against the unhappiness side, it's going to look and feel like unhappiness. So it's not like equanimity doesn't mean we don't know the difference between bumping up against happiness and bumping up against unhappiness, having something that tastes good and having something that tastes horrendous. In a way, as we practice, we're more clearly aware of what's pleasant and what's unpleasant, but the idea is not to be confused by the joy and the happiness, and not to be confused by the unhappiness. Meski and Shelley and I are going to be teaching a workshop on impermanence and anxiety and change on Saturday. I think, is it the 7th of March? 11 to 5 if anybody wants to join in for that. But we met today, just this afternoon, to talk about how we want to teach. And we were talking about loss, the experience of loss, and how there can be this sense in, superficial sense, hopefully, in Buddhist practice, and I think just generally that if we're a wise, spiritual, mature human being, then if there's loss, we don't freak out because what's the point? But it can be a kind of imitation of wisdom, like I should know better than to freak out just because this person died, or this pet died, or whatever it might be, or I lost this job, or this big thing happened and changed, and I wasn't expecting it. But it might be that, like going back to that image of the log floating down the river, like we might get naturally, the log and the current, we might get entangled for a while. It might be messy. We might be really, in terms of the sense experiences, we might be really impacted by bumping up against the unhappiness side or the happiness side of the river. So the practice isn't like that we're not going to bump up against either side, happiness and unhappiness, but the practice, the development or the maturing of practice is not being confused. When we're all entangled on the happiness or unhappiness side, wisdom understands, oh yeah, there's a lot of happiness going on, or a lot of unhappiness going on. There is this pain of loss. There are a lot of tears. There are a lot of whatever the person, this body, mind, whatever is happening. I remember, I don't know where I heard this, it might have been a talk that Sylvia Boorstein gave, but I remember this happened a while back, maybe even 20 years ago, but I forget exactly what it was, but Sharon Salzberg was in an accident, a car accident, or had some sort of significant illness. This is a while back. And Sylvia Boorstein, who, colleague of Sharon Salzberg, but also a student, early student of Sharon Salzberg, sent Sharon some kind of an email, as I remember the story at least, saying, you know, I don't care about the teachings right now. I want you to get better. You know, it was like this fierce, not afraid to be a good friend who doesn't want their good friend to be suffering. And like, not afraid to play the role of, I want you to get better. Not confused about that role, that seeming attachment, right? Because otherwise, not attachment is this imitation, like I don't know much, but I know I'm not supposed to be attached, so I'm not going to look attached. Because it's this, like, I want to look right, as opposed to letting it rip. So when there is this sort of, oh, I don't like the idea that you're sick. I don't like the idea that you're hurting. I want you to get better, right? That somehow there's no friction, there's no weight in being the friend who's passionate about you getting better. I don't know if I'm conveying it exactly right, but do you see what I'm saying? It's so easy for the practice to become idealistic or to think we're getting this about not self. Because then it's an idea, and then we have some allegiance to the idea of not self, and then we try to figure out, well, what does that look like so that I look like that idea of not self, or that idea of non-attachment. And then it gets stinky. And Ajahn he's going to talk about this. Let me read a little bit more of this. I was looking to get this article for you, but I couldn't find it online. And the copy I have is really tiny. So this is a little later down. He writes, or it's probably a transcription of a talk that Ajahn Chah, so this is this well-known Thai monk and Buddhist meditator and just great teacher. We still think this is me, this is mine. We attach to things and invest them with meaning. When we do this, we can't disentangle from them. The involvement deepens and the mess gets worse and worse. If we know that there is no self, that body and mind are really not self, as the Buddha taught, when we keep on investigating, we will eventually come to realize the actual conditions of selflessness. So we use the idea of not self not to imitate, not to pretend it's true, but we use the idea of not self to get interested in the reality of the present moment. And then arises, right, out of Buddha knowing Dhamma, there arises the direct understanding of the way it always was and is and will be, right? Just the way that it is. So we're not trying to make something happen. We're using these ideas to inspire the heart to be interested in the way it is. Whatever not self is, whatever the Buddhists, these words point to, it's right here. It's this. It's not something else. So not self is this, right? And what is this? You know, when we do have that stability of awareness, right? It's this being known. And we want to trust that, keep trusting that, because it will arise out of that ordinary connecting with this is being known, this is being known. And it's just that process of this being known becoming more simple and more inclusive. Because there might be a little me, this perception of a me who's a little bored by this being known. But that's something being known too. Oh yeah, boredom's being known. Frustration's being known. Trying hard is being known. Wanting to give up is being known. So to keep whatever it is that's arising, that's just another thing being known. We will genuinely see that there is no self or other. Pleasure is merely pleasure. feeling is merely feeling, memory is merely memory, thinking is merely thinking. They are all things that are merely themselves. Good is merely good, bad is merely bad. There is no happiness or real suffering. There are merely existing conditions, merely happy, merely suffering, merely hot, merely cold, merely being a person, merely a being or a person. A little later, eventually our perceptions will change. The right conviction, the right conviction that there is a self and things belonging to self will gradually come undone. When this sense of things is removed, the opposite perception will keep increasing steadily. And then a few paragraphs down, the Buddha taught the Dharma that we ought to know and to see. And this Dharma is right here within us, within this body and mind. We have it already. We should come to know and see it. And then at the end of this article, this little talk he gave, today I'm speaking a little about Dharma for grown-ups. When those of childish intelligence hear that there is no self, when they hear that nothing is truly theirs, not even the body, they may wonder, should I stick a knife in my flesh? Should I smash all the cups and plates and be done with it because nothing is mine? It's not that way. It is thick obscuration that can lead people to such absurd ideas. Because the thing we don't realize, when the mind does react, an untrained mind, like mostly we are at most of the time, when we hear these ideas and we will misinterpret them, because we're going to hear these ideas in terms of, how is this going to be helpful for me? How can I use this strategically to get away from suffering? So instead, we're using the ideas to get interested, right? Because it's really about shifting perception. So the idea is just a support as we get close to the way it is, like we tried to do during the sit tonight. I don't know if it was helpful, the instructions, but to stabilize awareness, be present with some continuity, and then in that stability, in that relative settledness, naturally, it's not that hard to notice doing, being a doer, doing something, being a meditator, meditating. And then just observe that sense of being a doer, but from this stability of awareness, this relaxed, curious, interested place. And you'll see that transformation from being a doer doing to just doing being known, knowing being known. And it's not that hard to kind of go from the complexity of I'm here meditating, I'm here being with this experience and not liking it, I'm here adjusting my body, trying to find a comfortable sitting posture, I'm here wondering, what's that sound? That more complex way of perceiving, to learning to trust the mindful awareness, right? So the way of perceiving that we're learning to trust is the something being known, which is just the essence of mindful awareness. It's not adding anything to mindful awareness. Something being known, Buddha knowing Dhamma. It's so simple that it's hard. Because our mind is deeply mistrustful of what's simple. Because we're arrogantly sure that it isn't simple, it's complex, because it's about me and my likes and dislikes, and I'm a suffering being, and I want to get done with the suffering. And I notice there's like lots of books in the teacher office at Common Ground, so it's got to be complex. And if you go to Dharma Seed, there are tens of thousands of talks, I think. So it's got to be complex, right? And, there's 3 or 4 things happening in that common ground every week. If we're really simple, why are so many people talking? So so much of our, and we do get, I think it's not uncommon, this wholesome sense of nausea that we get around self-help, right? I mean, mostly we're addicted to it. Someone comes up with a new herb that does this or that, or this new technique, or this new therapeutic modality, or this or new that, or new religion, new spiritual healer, or psychic, or our ears perk up. Oh, that could be, I could use that to bring some clarity into my life and resolve this or that. But do you notice sometimes that kind of, for me, it's almost like a nausea, like the endlessness of trying to fix my life. So one of my earlier teachers said, this obsession with solving the problems the self has versus being curious about the dukkha, being curious about the weight the self is, or the weight that selfing is. And that's when we're becoming a student of Dharma, right? Using the Buddhist teachings. Student of Dharma means we're a student of the way it is. We're not really a student of the Buddha. The Buddha didn't teach Buddhism. He taught about Dhamma, or Dharma, the way it is. So his teachings are teachings, instructions that support Buddha knowing Dhamma, this being awake to the way it is. And that changes everything. So doubt is such a useful thing to notice, how the mind is spinning in a way that never clarifies the essence of the doubt. Right? That there's something endless when our mind is spinning in an unproductive way. If we could just step out a little, we'll see that the way my mind is worrying or doubting or spinning will never resolve what it thinks the problem is. And that's basically a metaphor for our whole condition as a human being, an ignorant human being, is we're trying to be happy. We're trying to go from being a suffering human being to a non-suffering human being. But the way that the mind is framing it only is the essence of the cause of the stress we're experiencing. So the harder we try, the more it's clear that we're a suffering human being. And you see that in Buddhist circles, because a lot of what we do sensitizes us. It may not initially bring in a lot of wisdom, but we definitely get sensitive. So it becomes clearer and clearer that nothing is working. I'm stressed. I'm neurotic. I'm sensitive to how neurotic all of you are, right? And I'm cold, and I'm irritated by that smell, and I can't handle, garlic and gluten and dairy. And I mean, this is what you notice when you're in Dharma communities, because people start to notice how sensitive the mind and body is to everything. And reality isn't just a function of like, what is the experience when the body comes in contact with this smell, but it also gets amplified by sensitivity, by how the mind pays attention. So if there's a lot of attentiveness, then that particular insult will appear bigger. That noxious smell, that irritation in the gut from eating this particular thing. Everything appears bigger because the sensitivity grows. So I often say that the way the practice works is we become really sensitive, and it becomes impossible to be a human being when we're really sensitive unless wisdom starts to catch up to the sensitivity. And we start growing. Did somebody faint? So the nice thing that actually helps is just for most of us to be relaxed and just to breathe. And I know there's at least one doctor over there, so I think we're probably in good shape. So if you don't mind, if you're not a medical person, then maybe just sitting down. And then who's ever over there that, like Steve, you could just let us know if we should call 911. Steve, what do you think? Okay. So then let's give them space. So this is another passage from the Buddha. Practitioners, I am is a conceiving, I am this is a conceiving, I shall be is a conceiving, I shall not be is a conceiving, I shall be possessed of form is a conceiving, I shall be percipient is a conceiving, I shall not be percipient is a conceiving. Conceiving is a dis-ease, conceiving is a tumor, is a barb. By overcoming conceiving practitioners, one is called the sage at peace. And the sages at peace are not born, do not age, do not die. They are not shaken, are not agitated, for there is nothing present in them by which they might be born. Not being born, how could they age? Not aging, how could they die? Not dying, how could they be shaken? Not being shaken, why would they be agitated? And again, we might hear something like that and think, well, I just need to stop thinking or conceiving of this or conceiving of that. But it's more about seeing that habit of our mind. Like even, this is a perfect example where somebody has passed out or whatever's going on over there. And just to notice, not to try to like, oh, don't conceive, because that's just the next conception. But just to see that part of the mind. And can we relate to the conceiving, the wanting to know, the speculation? How do we relate to that? And what can we do with that? What would be the useful way? Because you see, it's like living in the mystery without an idea. Life is a real, it's not defined, it's a mystery. And it's scary to not know, to not define, to leave things be unformed or undefined. And it's relatively easy if we fix the attention on something, but to kind of know that it's unformed. That's why often in meditation it's nice, even if you're using a more directed meditation object like your breath for a good part of the sit, it's nice to save some time at the end of the sit where you can just be open and practice letting everything be unformed, so that conceivings will happen, thoughts will happen, but you're not, you're training the mind not to be dependent on any of the conceptions. Sometimes when people are on retreat, I meet with yogis, and I've been on a lot of retreats myself, my own retreats, and there is a place in practice where the mental activity, the movement of thinking, thoughts, can happen, but because that relationship to conceptions is really easeful, then I'm not even demanding, there's no part of the mind demanding that the thoughts make sense. Not so you'll notice like little fragments of mental images and fragments of thought. They won't even be fully formed. Have you had that happen where it's just like a spewing? That's sort of a negative way to say it, but just like a waterfall where nothing is really formed. I mean, the mental activity like a waterfall, a spewing of images and fragments of thoughts and just kind of moving, and no part of the mind demanding that it all makes sense. But the neat thing, you might think, oh God, I'm going crazy. It's just like nonsense. But it's like the mind can immediately, like there's no distance between that sort of unformed flowing of mental activity and a very clear, what we would consider a clear rational thought, like, wait till I tell Mark about this, or whatever, it might be. Because it's like even that more well-formed thought that sort of makes sense in a relative sense, the mind doesn't have to be dependent on it. It's just like really, the same thing, I'm sure you've had this, a lot of you have had this with bodily experience, like sensations. And when you're aware, initially when we're aware of the body, what actually dominates our perception is the idea of the body, the mental picture of the body, and the ideas about the body. We're not actually in the world of sensation yet. But with some practice, and maybe we have a relatively good set, and so the mind learns to be Buddha knowing Dhamma, awareness, being aware of the coming and going, and all of a sudden the idea and mental image of the body can disappear, and the Dhamma, the actuality of the body sort of comes into the foreground. And then that's just really useful to see. The body sort of disappears as an idea. And then, in a sense, wisdom understands that the body is empty of self. It's empty of that thing that we used to refer to or relate to me. This body that I own, or I'm in this body, or this body is mine. Doesn't make sense when it's just a dance of sensation. And it actually has the feeling of being more like space than being something we normally, in a relative sense, refer to as the body. So next week, or last week, we'll talk about not self and freedom. And Carol sent a fragment or piece of a poem, and I'll send it out in the next week's email, a few days before maybe. But this is the few lines. Before we were born, we found ways not to exist. Happily, playfully, thriving on no fish, 1 billion years before the universe exploded. No one missed us. We didn't miss ourselves. There was no absence. And the poet is the letter D for the first name, Nursi. I'm not sure how they pronounce it. Nursi. And it's called The Body. Good, but we have about 9 minutes. It'd be nice to hear from a few folks. Questions, of course, and your own reflections on what I've said or the study you've been doing, your practice. Yeah, please start us off, Tracy. Back here.
Thank you. My name's Tracy. Can you hear me?
Maybe, Doug, could you turn that mic up a little?
I've got it right. Yeah.
It's the lights on, right?
Yes. Yes. Can't hear me?
Just speak loud.
Okay. My name's Tracy. And I was in Burma in January for a 3-week retreat, so I missed some of this. But I was, when you were talking tonight, Mark, about how the insight arises out of the practice, that's really what I have experienced. That's been my experience. And this time on retreat, the kind of the anicca and the anatta, how they're so connected. I was just seeing things disappearing, and I started to realize how that's actually what's happening, and that what so often when I'm just in daily life, the mind has this image or memory, of a sensation that makes it seem like something is still happening that's gone.
Yeah.
And that then turned into this realization that that's how this sense of self happens. You know, that there's these moments that are ending, arising, ending, and the mind is making it seem solid, and it's not solid. And what arose from that, so those were kind of in the practice. You know, I was seeing all this disappearing, and it felt like someone was playing a trick on me. Like, where did that go? And then, kind of in the daily life, something happened where I didn't show up. I didn't ring the bell on time. And there was this moment of, like, not self, where I realized this thing happened that I didn't ring the bell because of a number of factors. And normally, I would have felt like shame or, you know, this whole thing. And what I just had this sense of was that came to be because of certain factors. And there was no, and even there was a thought, I'm unreliable, but there was no sense that it was about me or any reflection on me. And it was very freeing, and there was a lot of backlash then from the self. Being
Or from
afraid
habit.
of that, being afraid.
Yeah.
And so I'll just end with just like, it just has given me such a sense of compassion for the path. Like for us, you know, as we try to keep going, and that, because it's not always easy. I mean, it's like when we talk about it being freeing, it's freeing, but it's also scary.
Yeah.
And so then this compassion comes in about even that is okay. I don't know, so sorry. That was a spewing.
Yeah. Yeah, but you created a little window for all of us, and especially people who haven't been able to do longer retreats. So it's really beautiful that you're willing to share, Tracy. I appreciate that. Yeah. And remember that it is, like Tracy's last point about it being scary, even when the heart is letting go of what isn't true or delusion, it's still what the heart knows. So there is a real grieving process in this. We're only letting go of what's not true. But that letting go hurts. There's grieving involved in the letting go of that. And it's like putting down something, but we don't know what's left. That's the thing. That's the mystery. Yeah, we have time maybe for one more person. Anybody else like to share? Yeah, Dave, right behind you. Tracy on this side.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Dave, and I got a question, Mark. You know, like this relative and ultimate or absolute reality. I mean, living in this world, that sense of self.
Maybe a little closer, Dave.
The sense of self comes up, and I was reading about how this selfing and even not selfing are actions, their perceptions and actions with their intentions and volitions and the karmic consequences of that. And so the question becomes, or I think Bhikkhu Thanissaro wrote, the question becomes, when is the sense of self useful and leading to happiness and release, and when is the sense of not self useful and happiness and leading to release? And it's, so it seems like there's, in my mind, you know, all these things are spinning around, and it's they're skillful means, but it's hard to put them together. But it's helpful for me to look at it as when is the perception of self skillful, because living in the world, it can be skillful, and it oftentimes is unskillful. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say a little bit earlier in the talk, and we can leave it here with this point that Dave's making. I mean, ultimately, our functioning in the world where we are, whether you call it the relative world of earning a living and having relationships and using personal pronouns, right? That activity can happen without any friction, any tightness, any oh God, I got to use a personal pronoun again. I'm free, but I got to use this me and I and you and them. But it's really like moving, living without friction. And that nature, nature knows how to move whether it's a stormy day or a clear day. The activity of causes and conditions is ultimately, friction is an idea. It's not a reality. So the idea of me having to use pronouns or me not thinking I shouldn't be using pronouns, that's totally in the world of suffering and ignorance. But freedom doesn't have a problem with anything, including the relative world of pronouns, right? It's just activity. So freedom doesn't need to look special. The sense of someone being free, like a wise person, a well-practiced person, is they don't have a problem being an ordinary human being. That's what I was trying to point to with that story about Sylvia and Sharon. And how nice it is to be a well-practiced Buddhist, but then when your friend is hurting, not feeling obliged to look like a Buddhist, but just being free to be the friend of this person and feeling the tug in your heart, knowing your friend is in a difficult place and really not wanting them, but not needing the moment to be different than it is. No friction inhabiting that space of not wanting this person to be suffering. Right?
And that's kind of what I thought of when you told that story. I was wondering if that was...
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Dave. That's really powerful. So it's 9 o'clock. Let's leave it here. We'll just take a second or two to let go of the words. Just take a breath or two. Wishing all beings ease and well-being, including ourselves. And thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks for being in the class. We have one more week. You can go ahead and register for the next course, Cultivating Wholesome Relationships, which begins something like the second Monday in March. Take care.